Kia ora, te rau. Welcome, whānau, to the War on News, your weekly safety council and consultant government affairs, being live from the palatial Stratus News bunker, buried deep beneath the heart of the Greyland Republic. If this show is Auckland Transport during the Rugby World Cup, and tonight's political media crimes against reason kill zone, John Key secretly Pied Piper of Party Central and seizes the Auckland waterfront. As predicted, Auckland Transport is shit hashtag becomes highest trending tweet on Twitter. Whānau, a picture says 1,000 words. This one says less than a dozen, all of them defamatory. Private prisons cost more than public prisons, which is funny because we were all promised the free market version that makes corporate profit from incarceration would be cheaper. Plus this week's Sex in the Super City and this week's Wanko the Week award. Leading the War on News this week, brothers and sisters, the media paused in covering government incompetence over the Rugby World Cup up to focus on the terrifying headlines that Happy Feet's tracking device had gone silent. And I, for one, thank the little baby Jesus. Imagine how many wasted hours of Happy Feet updates we've all avoided. The predictable documentary funded by New Zealand On Air to track down Happy Feet's family while he's nesting, the endless comparisons about how far he swam against celestial objects distance from the sun, the inevitable Happy Feet home pregnancy tests. Brothers and sisters, in the first known outbreak of green rage in New Zealand, a Wellington family are complaining that a staff member from EnviroWaste left a nasty message on their recycling bill that read, "No bottles, dick," after the Wellington family put bottles in the wrong recycling bill. Heather Biswell said the inappropriate message was targeting her children who put the bin out. They will see that and see that it's directly and specifically aimed at them, she said. Which was, of course, the point of writing the message in the first place, because you have to put bottles in the right recycling bin, you dick. Brothers and sisters, Peter Dunn loves tobacco, alcohol and gambling, but hates synthetic marijuana and medical marijuana. The synthetic marijuana we all understand, because seriously, who would buy crappy synthetic stuff when New Zealand grows some of the best real marijuana in the world? But banning HIV and cancer sufferers, those with chronic pain and legitimate patients who would benefit from the scientifically proven pain relief benefits of something as natural as a growing plant, seems in light of Dunn's love affair with tobacco, booze and gambling, the height of hypocrisies. HIV sufferers and those with cancer and those chronic pain and legitimate pain patients are not criminals, yet Peter wants to continue to criminalise them if they seek out medical marijuana. Look, we all know the joke that is prohibition, but why punish the sick and those who could benefit from the medicinal properties? And don't give me that we want legitimate pharmacies to produce medical marijuana crap. The legitimate pharmaceutical industry has no interest in putting their legal drug-pushing empire that is pain relief at any risk by a plant that needs no further refining than lighting up the cherry. Waiting for legitimate pharmaceutical companies to come up with their own medical marijuana product is like waiting for the oil companies to come up with electric cars. To the headlines, whānau, you have to feel for John Key's bad luck timing. 30 minutes after smugly mocking critics of his $10 million temporary cloud tent at Party Central, downtown Auckland was declared a public safety hazard. He's the Pied Piper of Party Central, where John Key boldly declares New Zealand should party in a central location using faulty transport systems and ill-conceived ideas. So the masses shall centrally party. No matter how many times people would point out that 60,000 into 12,000 won't go, the bewilderingly optimistic John Key would answer with little more than a shrug and that face you pull when you fart. Amazingly, that look seems to have been enough for the mainstream media. Even though his government were told the transport system wouldn't work under this weight 20 months ago, John Key's response is still, and that's good enough for close-up. John Key could set a train full of Rugby World Cup fans on fire and the New Zealand Herald editorial would still read, "PM shows bold leadership." As for John's Boris Yeltsin sober performance at the ceremony, let's hope the Prime Minister didn't pilot his own New Zealand Air Force chopper ride back home. Man troll, Mr. Prime Minister, man troll. We now have a situation where the Minister for Trainwrecks, Murray McCully, has seized control of the wharf using extraordinary powers while blaming Len Brown for decades of underinvestment into Auckland's public transport infrastructure. After being told 2 years ago the system wouldn't cope, yet demanded that 60,000 fitted into 12,000, the government rush in and take over the entire event. The train company weren't even asked to put on extra trains, for God's sakes. Now the government have seized the Rugby World Cup Party Central. Does that make it a legitimate target for anti-government protests? Has Murray really thought out the implications of this? To the headlines, whānau. When I joked for the last 12 months about how Auckland Transport is shit hashtag would become the highest trending tweet of the Rugby World Cup, I was, of course, hoping my snarling bile on how ill-organised Auckland's public transport was looking would just be a bit of tongue-in-cheek. Turns out it wasn't, and the only thing on time was the "I told you so" express. The hate crime that is Auckland's poorly funded public transport system is just another fail mark against New Zealand's attempt to be a first world country. First, the good news. The opening ceremony was well done. It's difficult to screw up fireworks. Thankfully, Māori saved New Zealand from looking about as culturally enlightened as a whites-only Australian working man's club. Originally, Māori weren't even invited to bring their waka in, and it would have just been the usual geriatric antics of Dave Dobbin and the Finn brothers. In a way, this managed to show the duality of New Zealand. A bunch of rich, spoilt baby boomers singing the same boring tunes, given preference over the energy and dynamism of a younger brown generation. Hilarious. What we do best in New Zealand is polish turds. Bereft of the political leadership that can stand up to the motorway building power clique who really run Auckland, alongside a Wellington political elite who have stolen billions in transport taxes while leaving Auckland's public transport infrastructure broken, we never have the investment into our public infrastructure and so are left to polish the lump of shit we've been left with as if it's manna from heaven. Normally a government upgrades public transport for an event like this, not in New Zealand. This month oversaw new public transport cutbacks. Instead, we've poured $500 million into a stadium upgrade that will never pay off. Great turd polishing, New Zealand. Pity about the infrastructure. I live downtown, and the morning after the city was inch thick in a film of greasy vomit and urine. You feel like wearing a condom before touching any of the ATM machines. Ew. Moving on to the headlines, whānau. Private prisons costing more than public prisons, which is funny because we were all promised the free market version that makes corporate profit from incarceration would be cheaper. News this week that the 960-bed private prison at Wiri had now spent so much on corporate consultants, it's now more expensive than a publicly built prison. What's the point of building a private prison where corporations make a profit from incarcerating New Zealanders if it's more expensive than a publicly built one? We shouldn't be surprised that the facade of private prisons being cheaper is falling over before the bloody thing is even built, because at the Select Committee meeting into private prisons, the CEO of GEO told the Select Committee that his private prison industry wouldn't save the government money. Our prison system works about as well as our train system. Whānau, are you feeling sexy? It's Sex in the Super City time. You know that shit is messed up when right-wing baby-faced assassin Cameron Brewer is getting in hits over the Rugby World Cup public transport fiasco. What makes right-wing baby-faced assassin Cameron Brewer's attempt to place blame and thwart Len's offer of restoration so audacious is that it has been his mates in power who have been doing all they can to underfund Auckland public transport while pouring billions into motorways. Stephen Joyce, the Transport Minister, who when appointed as Transport Minister had to admit he had never caught any public transport as an adult, has gone amazingly quiet since the Rugby World Cup fiasco, hasn't he? Which is strange because until then he was always telling Auckland that public transport like the electrified rail loop wasn't a priority and that despite the billions he's wasting on roads, Aucklanders should stump up for their own rail loop, even though Wellington owes us from decades of underfunding. To have right-wing baby-faced assassin Cameron Brewer's stomp and pout over public transport while his government mates rip public transport to pieces is like Paul Henry bemoaning the lack of intelligent debate in current affairs, which is why Len's response to date is so mystifyingly weak. It isn't his fault that he inherited a busted and broken joke of a public transport system, and he has fought Joyce tooth and nail for an electrified rail loop. It was the same thing over the statutory Māori boards that was Rodney Hyde's fault, not Len's, yet the Mayor's office never fights back. The meek might inherit the earth, Len, but the bloody angry articulating public fury wins elections, and a weak mayor serves only one term. Central government have taken $7 billion in transport tax from Aucklanders in 15 years, yet have only reinvested half of that back into Auckland's infrastructure. The Auckland Super City was supposed to wrestle this power back, but because National's candidate didn't win, it's Wellington once again robbing Auckland. Meanwhile, the transport fiasco report that was due out on Tuesday probably won't turn up until late Friday. Right, now let's finish the show by handing out this week's Waco of the Week award. This week's Wanko of the Week, brothers and sisters, has to go to the War on Terror. So 10 years of fighting a noun, and what do we have? A cost in excess of $3 trillion and a loss of civilian life that is somewhere over $1 million. That's $1 million dead with a $3 trillion price tag. Someone paid and someone got slayed. Welcome to global capitalism as run by the military-industrial complex. I remember the days of argument as the US attempted to justify their illegal invasion of Iraq. The glorious lies they spun that were regurgitated by the war nuts in this country. Remember the lies? Saddam and Al-Qaeda working together, trying to buy yellow cake, trying to build reactors. Remember the WMDs? How about the imminent threats? Oh, the lies that our mainstream media so readily burped out as the National Party berated Helen Clark for not going in with our mates, giving the war in Iraq all the moral authority of a pack rape. I remember when the lies and true horror of what we had unleashed on the people of Iraq, Afghanistan, and any number of the drone strike proxy wars the West wages with PlayStation Glee started to sink home. How those who were so loud in using September 11 as a justification for exporting democracy from 30,000 feet went ever so quiet once the impact on hearts and minds was those hearts and minds blown apart. The American overreaction was not the triumphant crescendo of the new American century as the neocons had hoped. What it showed us was the fragility of hard power. The cost of these ridiculous and needless wars bankrupted America, not just financially, but they lost the Washington consensus hegemonic dominance as China rises ever so brightly. The South Pacific will become the new Cold War zone as the US and China slug it out for influence and dominance, hence the draconian fishhooks and the free trade agreements with both of these nations. This perpetual war of terror, born mostly by the poor caught up as collateral damage, should be seen as merely another bleak chapter in our ongoing cycle of violence, fed by a military-industrial complex with a profit motive and destruction. This has always been a war of terror. That's it for tonight, folks. Don't forget Citizen A plays Friday, 8 p.m. Freeview 21 and Sky 89. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook site. It has all the shows posted up online and allows you to befriend other like-minded news citizens for romantic news moments. Good night, New Zealand. You stay classy, Aotearoa. Righto.